Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The library at Ellison Air Force Facility wasn't a place of excitement. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed above the rows of metal shelves, and the faint smell of old paper mixed with the bitter scent of coffee from the break room next door. For most people on base, it was just another room, somewhere to sign out a manual or return a map after training. But for Sarah Whitmore, it was her world. She moved through the aisles like a ghost, organizing stacks of binders filled with flight data and maintenance reports. Every label had to face the same way, every page had to line up. She liked the order of it. Sarah wasn't anyone important. Not a pilot, not a soldier, just the librarian. Most people barely remembered her name. They'd come in asking, "Hey, ma'am, do you have the updated F-22 checklist?" and leave without a second glance. But she knew them. She remembered who borrowed what, who always returned books late, who dog-eared pages. She noticed patterns. And while the others lived in noise and adrenaline, she lived in silence. Her mornings began with unlocking the double doors, flicking on the lights, and breathing in the stillness. She'd start her day by checking the returns cart, manuals covered in grease stains, mission files smudged with fingerprints. Every mark told her something. Sometimes she imagined she was reading their stories through the smears left on paper. Outside, the base was alive with motion, engines roaring, drills echoing through the desert air, but inside her library, time seemed to stop. The hum of the lights was her background music, the clicking of her keyboard her rhythm. She told herself she was content. And maybe she was, at least until the silence began to feel like a cage. That night, like every other, she stayed late. The others had gone home, and the hallways outside were empty. The air conditioning buzzed, and her desk lamp cast a warm glow over stacks of folders. She liked those hours. They felt safe. Predictable. She was checking off another list when she noticed something odd. A technical binder that didn't belong in her section. Its label was printed with red letters, Restricted Archive Wing. Sarah frowned. That area wasn't her responsibility. Usually, she left those for morning delivery, but tonight she hesitated. The binder wasn't heavy, but it felt different. She turned it in her hands, running her fingers along the spine. Curiosity tugged at her. The restricted wing was a hallway she passed every day but never entered. Everyone called it the vault corridor. Even saying the words carried a kind of quiet warning. Only certain ranks had access, and she wasn't one of them. Still, she looked toward the heavy steel door at the end of the hall. The red access panel blinked faintly in the dim light. She told herself to wait until morning. To leave it. But something in her wanted to finish the job. Just one last file before heading home. She grabbed her badge, walked down the hall, and swiped it through the reader. She expected the usual rejection sound, the red light, the shrill beep, the reminder that she didn't belong there. Instead, the light turned green. For a second, she froze. It had to be a glitch. She pulled her badge back, swiped again. Green. The lock clicked open with a deep metallic sound that echoed down the empty hallway. Her pulse quickened. The door creaked slightly ajar, as if waiting for her to push it open. A rush of cold air brushed her face. The smell was different, metallic, dusty, untouched. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no cameras turning. Just her, the door, and the soft hum of the bass far beyond. She took a step closer. The badge hung loosely in her fingers. She whispered to herself, just for a second. I'll drop it off and go." Her voice sounded small in the quiet. Then she pressed her palm against the cold steel and pushed. The door opened wider, revealing a shadowed corridor lined with metal panels. Lights flickered on one by one, leading deeper inside. The sound of the lock behind her echoed like the closing of a vault. Sarah swallowed hard. Her badge was still glowing green in her hand. She should have turned back right then. But instead, she stepped inside, unaware that from this moment forward, her quiet life as a base librarian was over forever, and the doors sealed behind her with a heavy click that sounded final. Cold air rolled across the floor. Motion lights hummed on in a line, waking the corridor in segments, as if the place were blinking awake to study her. Sarah held the binder close to her chest. The walls were steel, the floor smooth concrete, the kind that made footsteps carry. She forced herself to breathe evenly and walked. The hallway opened into a room larger than she expected. Not neat stacks like her library. This was a maze of tall metal cabinets, sealed crates, and heavy lockers with warning stencils she didn't recognize. Some labels were clean and recent. Others were sun-faded and scuffed, like they had been hauled through more than one building over more than one decade. The air smelled like dust, oil, and old paper. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt maintained, like a machine that only a few people knew how to run. She found a central table and set the binder down, palms sweaty. She wasn't supposed to look. She knew that. But curiosity pressed in hard. A folder sat near the edge, not locked, stamped in tidy black letters, "Unacknowledged Mission Summary." Below it, a name for the operation she had never heard in any public briefing. The date was recent. She opened it with both hands, bracing herself. The pages were clipped, almost sterile in tone, location redacted, objective short, support assets listed as rotary, fixed wing, SIGINT. Her eyes moved line by line until a personnel list stopped her cold. Harker, Ryan C., Captain, status, lost, cause, training accident, public. Sarah's mouth went dry. Public. The word sat there like a warning. She remembered Ryan's easy smile at the coffee stand, the way he always signed manuals carefully, never rushing. The official announcement 2 months ago had been simple: equipment failure during routine drills. Here, the story changed. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She flipped to the photo appendix. Grainy stills, night shots, long lenses, figures moving along a dark airstrip. One frame caught her breath, a pilot climbing into an unmarked jet, no tail insignia, no base markings. The back caption was plain: Asset Exfil, contingent approved. She didn't know all the codes, but she knew enough to understand that what she was reading didn't match anything she was supposed to know. A faint tick sounded above her. Not a drip, not a pipe, something mechanical, like a camera lens adjusting. She looked up. The ceiling vents were simple metal slats, the light fixtures standard. But the feeling of being watched was sharp and present, the way hair rises before a storm. She closed the folder carefully and slid it back exactly as she'd found it, aligning the corners and smoothing the edge as if neatness could erase her presence. She scanned the room one last time. Some crates had strange geometric symbols, not unit patches, circles intersecting triangles. Another cabinet drawer was labeled with regions, not departments: Andes, Sahara, Arctic. She felt a pull to open them, to keep going. But the weight of the room pressed back. She picked up her original binder, wiped her palms on her slacks, and made herself walk toward the door. The lock hissed when she swiped out. The corridor outside felt too bright, like she had been underwater and surfaced too fast. She didn't run, but her steps were quicker than normal. In the library, the lamp's warm light looked small and harmless. She sat, stared at her keyboard, and didn't type a thing. Driving home, she checked her mirror more than she should have. The desert road was empty, just a single sedan far behind, light steady, never gaining, never falling back. She told herself it was nothing. At Carson Ridge, the hall smelled like detergent and someone's takeout. Her door was as she'd left it. Inside, she leaned her forehead against the cool wood and counted to 10. Sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the word public in parentheses and Ryan's name anchored to a different reality. She got up, made coffee she didn't drink, and laid her badge on the table. The plastic rectangle looked cheap. Tonight, it had opened something it shouldn't have. By mistake? On purpose? She couldn't answer that without stepping back inside. Morning felt off. At the base coffee stand, the barista smiled the same way as always, but a man 2 customers back wore sunglasses though the sun hadn't cleared the hangers. His posture was military in everything but clothing. When Sarah glanced again, he was gone. In the library, a sergeant lingered at the atlas shelf too long, flipping pages like someone pretending to read. She logged returns with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. By afternoon, she convinced herself of a plan: say nothing, act normal, wait for the system to correct itself. Maybe the green light had been a programming error and security would fix it before end of day. But when she checked her desk drawer, the one she always locked and left perfectly square, the paper stack inside was slightly crooked. A small thing. Small enough to deny. Big enough to feel. She stayed late again, telling herself the backlog needed attention. The hallway was empty when she turned off the library lights. For a long minute she stood in the dark, listening to the air conditioner and her own breath. Then she walked to the restricted wing and stopped. She didn't swipe. Not yet. She just looked at the door, at the reader, at the faint scuff marks near the handle that said many hands had touched it over many years. Her badge felt heavier than plastic should feel. Back at the apartment, the mirror above her dresser showed a woman who looked like Sarah but not quite. Same hair, same glasses, but the eyes were sharper, like they were trying to focus on something just out of frame. She turned away, opened her window for air, and found the same dark sedan idling across the street. Its headlights were off. It didn't leave when she noticed it. It didn't have to. She closed the blinds and told herself one rule: if the door opened once, she would not test it twice. Not until she figured out why. She stacked a few books on the table, slid the badge underneath, and tried again to sleep. Sometime after midnight, a soft scrape came from under her apartment door. Not a knock. Just the whisper of paper on wood. Sarah's breath caught. She waited, counting, then stepped close and lifted the envelope from the floor. No stamp, no name, no seal. Inside, a single slip with 5 words, neat handwriting without flourish: "You're not supposed to stop." The words were simple, almost polite, but they burned through the quiet of her apartment like a fuse. Sarah set the note beside her badge and stood very still. If someone could slide paper under her door without a sound, they could already be inside her life. She waited for a second envelope or a knock that didn't come. The clock on the stove ticked past 1 a.m. She didn't sleep. Morning made everything look normal, which only made it worse. At the coffee stand, the barista joked about the heat. 2 tables away, a civilian with a baseball cap read a manual upside down. In the library, a security team did a routine sweep she hadn't requested, their gloves too clean, their questions too casual. Major Evelyn Cross stopped by near noon, asked how the cataloging backlog was going, and held eye contact a beat too long. Sarah answered in a steady voice and watched Evelyn's gaze flick to the badge clipped at her waist, as if measuring it. She made a decision that afternoon. If she was a test subject, she could test back. She left work 15 minutes early, then 30 late the next day, then right on time the day after that. She switched exits. She changed lanes just to see who followed. The dark sedan adjusted like a metronome, never close enough to be a threat, never far enough to be lost. She wrote down license plates on a folded index card and slid the card into the spine of an outdated reference manual. No one ever checked that shelf. At least, no one was supposed to. The second note came 2 nights later. She found it tucked in the hinge of her apartment door, the handwriting the same, "Keep going." No signature. No symbol. She tore it in half and taped it back together, just to remind herself it was real. She told herself to report it, to walk into Evelyn's office and hand over both slips. She even drove past the security building after sunset. She didn't go in. Instead, she unlocked the library after hours and walked the quiet hall to the restricted wing. The badge reader blinked a steady red, then went green the instant she swiped. No alarm. No voice on the intercom. The vault's air hit her face like the inside of a walk-in freezer. She went straight to the central table, set her notepad down, and started reading. Boxes labeled with regions held mission summaries, maps traced with grease pencil, photos printed on paper that had yellowed at the edges. A folder marked Andy's contained a list of non-standard craft retrieval, the phrasing sterile enough to hide whatever it meant. Another drawer labeled Arctic included field photos of jagged metal in ice, captions using terms she didn't recognize. A long box stamped denial contained thermal paper transcripts where one sentence repeated, "If we are caught, they will deny we exist." She copied dates and code names into her notes, hands steady because someone's had to be. Ryan's name returned in a logistics section, not personnel, an aircraft assignment sheet with a tail number she'd never seen assigned to Ellison. Public cover, training sortie. Actual, asset retrieval escort. She gripped the folder and forced herself to breathe. It wasn't proof of everything, but it was proof of enough. She reshelved each binder exactly as she'd found it, aligning corners, closing clips, smoothing edges. The habit calmed her. The camera click overhead didn't. It sounded once, then again, the soft tick of a lens finding its focus. "You're watching," she said under her breath, not sure if the room could hear. "So watch me file this correctly." Back outside, the corridor felt narrow, the overhead lights too loud. She told herself not to look like she'd been anywhere except her desk. She told herself to walk, not run. In the days that followed, the base sharpened into 2 layers, the one everyone saw and the one that trailed her shadow. A tech she'd never met asked what time she usually took lunch. A janitor she knew waved with the kind of smile people use when they're pretending to be casual. Evelyn returned midweek with a clipboard and a neutral tone. "Any issues with inventory?" "None," Sarah said. It was true in the only way that mattered. The third note didn't wait for a door. It sat on her kitchen table when she got home, beside a glass of water she hadn't poured. Her window latch was turned the wrong direction. She froze, counted to 3, then read the line, "It's almost time." Fear flattened into something cleaner, resolve or stubbornness, she couldn't tell. She photographed all 3 notes, sealed the originals in an envelope, and hid them inside a hollow space under the lowest library shelf, behind a row of obsolete manuals. If someone wanted them, they'd have to know how she thinks. She built a small system for herself. She logged what she read in a code only she would understand, titles reduced to initials, dates turned into sums. She wore the same route grooves the Watchers wore, then stepped out of them on purpose to see who tripped. She replaced her desk lamp bulb and left a hair across the drawer seam at night. If the hair moved, she'd know. It moved twice. Days blurred. Nights were clean lines. The vault became a clock with its own hours. She learned which drawers stuck, which labels curled at the corners, which crates had fresh scuffs and which were older than anyone on base. She stopped pretending she hadn't crossed a line and started preparing for the price of it. Maybe the point was to see if she'd panic. She didn't. Maybe the point was to see if she'd sell it. She wouldn't. One evening, as the desert sky went from orange to steel blue, she stood at the library door and listened to the base quiet down. Engines cooled. Voices faded. Somewhere, metal clanged against metal in a distant hangar. She thought of the pilot with no insignia on his jet, of transcripts that assumed abandonment as a plan, of Ryan's name sitting on a line that didn't exist in public. She thought of order, and how easy it was to fake. She left the library lights off and walked the corridor by memory. The restricted wing waited the way it always did, the reader winking red like an eye that already knew. Sarah lifted her badge, felt its cheap plastic ridges bite her fingers, and understood this wasn't about a glitch. Someone had chosen her. Whether they wanted a recruit or a cautionary tale, they'd get a decision. She steadied her breath, squared the binder under her arm, and faced the door. Then she swiped her badge and stepped inside, and the vault answered with a cold breath and a low mechanical click that sealed the door behind her. The lights rose in a slow wave across the ceiling. Sarah moved past the first row of cabinets, ready to go straight to the table, ready to pretend she belonged here. She wasn't alone. A man stood by the central aisle as if he had been waiting between one blink and the next. No uniform. Dark suit, no tie, clean shoes that didn't make a sound on concrete. He didn't reach for a weapon and didn't raise his hands. He just stepped forward enough that she could see the small badge clipped at his belt, the kind of credential that meant everything and told nothing. "I wondered how long it would take you," he said. His voice was calm, as if they were in a hallway with vending machines instead of a locked room under a military base. Sarah didn't drop the binder. She tightened her grip until the plastic edges pressed into her skin. "If this is the part where I'm escorted out, say it." "That would have been days ago," he said. "You've already passed the dangerous stage where panic makes bad choices." "Who are you?" "Someone who reads what you read," he said. "Someone who needs what you already do." His eyes moved once to the notepad in her other hand. "You file cleanly. You leave things as you found them. You understand that the order matters." "I walked through an open door," she said. "That's it." "You walked through it again," he said. "And again. You tested. You watched back. You catalogued patterns without leaking a word. That is not an accident, Sarah." Hearing her name in his mouth hit harder than the cold air. "If this is a threat, just make it clear. It's a choice." He drew a small envelope from his jacket and set it on the table between two stacked folders. No flourish, no speech. Higher clearance. Real, not a glitch. With it, you stop being a liability we need to contain and become an asset we can train. "And if I don't?" "You'll return your badge," he said. "You'll sign a document. You'll move to a different installation where libraries are only libraries. You'll never set foot here again. That's the easy version. And the hard version? You try to carry both lives," he said, still calm. "That one doesn't last long." She looked past him to the crates with warning stencils, to the drawers labeled by regions instead of departments. "You left notes at my place." He didn't blink. "We left opportunities. You chose each one. So this was all a test." "It was an observation," he said. "We needed to know what you do when truth sits within reach and no one is watching but us." Her breath steadied. "What would I be doing with that envelope?" "What you already do," he said. "Read. Organize. Preserve. Identify what matters and protect it from being lost. There is a second record under the record people see. It needs keepers who don't run to microphones or burn what scares them." She thought of Ryan's name stamped with a lie. She thought of the transcripts that assumed denial. She thought of the glass of water that wasn't hers on her own table. Her fear had burned down into something smaller and sharper. "Do you expect me to agree with everything I'll read? I expect you to understand why some things are buried and why not everything buried should stay that way forever," he said. "You will have channels. You will have rules. You will have a cost. What happens to people like me in 5 years? They sleep less," he said. "They make fewer mistakes. They carry names no one else can carry." He didn't move toward her. He didn't press. He just let the room breathe around the small space between them, and she realized the decision wasn't going to be forced. That was the force. No threats. No cuffs. Just a door that had opened and kept opening until she understood that walking away would be the loudest act she could make. She set the binder down. The table felt cold through the thin folder cover. You could have picked someone with a rank. We tried that, he said. A hint of something like humor touched his mouth and vanished. Rank believes it understands already. You don't. You check the corners. She looked at the envelope. It was plain, unsealed. Inside would be plastic and metal and rules. She pictured returning to the upstairs quiet and pretending the hum of lights was enough. It wasn't. Not after seeing the word public sit next to a man she had known by his coffee order and the careful way he signed for a manual. Tell me one thing, she said. Was Harker a training accident? No, he said. No apology, no expansion. Just the word that acknowledged the hole without filling it. And you know why that answer stops there? She nodded once. It was the cleanest truth she'd heard since the first green light. The fear didn't vanish. It settled into a shape she could carry. If I take it, I'm in. If you take it, you're accountable, he said. To protocols, to judgment, to people who will never meet you and who need you anyway. Her hand hovered for a second. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't stalling. She was measuring the weight of something that looked like paper and felt like a hinge. She thought of order and how it breaks, of files that go missing because no one loved them enough to keep them where they belong, of history that rots in the dark when no one checks the humidity or the lies. She picked up the envelope. It was lighter than she expected. The room didn't change. The air didn't warm. The door didn't unlock. But something internal clicked into place like a drawer pushed all the way in. Good, he said, not smiling. Then we start now. How? He gestured to a short stack stamped with today's date. Cross-reference these with the logistics ledgers you flagged last week. Build the map. If there's a gap, you'll find it. If there's a pattern, you'll name it. Sarah slid the top file toward her, the motion familiar, almost ordinary. Her fingers stopped shaking. She didn't ask for a desk or a title. She didn't need either. She needed the work. He stepped back toward the door. You won't see me every time, he said. But you'll be seen. I got that, she said. He paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, you weren't chosen by mistake. She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. She opened the folder, let the first page settle under her palms, and read. The lines were clipped, the codes dry, the dates exact. The weight was real. She took the envelope, felt its thin weight, and said yes, and the vault didn't cheer or shift or bless the choice. It just kept humming, the way power does when it's steady. Sarah slid the new badge into place and started with the stack he'd indicated. Cross-referencing wasn't new to her. The difference now was the scale. The logistics ledgers she'd flagged last week, serials, tail numbers, fuel loads, opened like a second language. She built a quick map on scrap paper, arrows for transfers, dots for stops that shouldn't exist. Patterns emerged the way they always do when you line up what people try to hide. The work bled into days. There wasn't a formal briefing. There was access that worked everywhere it needed to and nowhere it didn't. She learned which terminals on base were segmented and which air-gapped machines weren't truly floating in the air. She signed documents that didn't say much and were clear anyway. She got a short training in a windowless room, chain of custody, compartment designations, what to do when a lock fails, what to do when a person fails. A man with an easy voice taught her how to recognize altered metadata. A woman with a scar on her knuckle taught her how to shut down a cabinet when the sensor lies. Evelyn appeared more often, not with threats, but with audits that looked normal to anyone not counting beats. She watched Sarah work and didn't pretend otherwise. You switched the index from alphanumeric to timeline, Evelyn said, without question mark. Chronology exposes gaps, Sarah answered. It wasn't a clever line. It was the truth. Evelyn's stare softened a centimeter. Make sure your gaps don't look like invitations. In the library upstairs, the surface routine held. Manuals still came back with grease stains. A private still asked for a map he'd never return. Sarah kept smiling the way a person smiles when the smile is part of the job. Downstairs, the vault tightened around a set of dates tied to Ryan. The tail number from his sheet wasn't in official maintenance. But she found it in a logistics backflow report hidden under a code 4, training supplies. She pulled fuel logs from the day he crashed. They didn't match the sortie length. The numbers were small, tidy, wrong. She typed the differences into her notebook and stopped, not because she was finished, but because the finish line wasn't hers to cross. She had joined to preserve, not to publish. Nights at Carson Ridge changed shape. The sedan sometimes parked farther down the block. Sometimes it didn't arrive. She slept in 3-hour slices and woke with a list. She bought heavier curtains and a second deadbolt. Once, she found a scratch under the lock plate that hadn't been there. She noted it. Nothing else moved. Her neighbors argued about a missing package in the hallway. Ordinary life stayed ordinary around her, as if refusing to make room for what she carried. Mr. Gray didn't appear again that week. Instead, small signs confirmed the track, a login prompt that recognized the new badge without lag, a folder that used to be sealed now opening with a delay that felt like consideration, a courier pouch arriving with a chain of custody sheet already filled with her name. The pouch held page scans from overseas. The redactions were cleaner than usual, the kind done by people who care about what they cut. She aligned them under a lamp and built a column of dates, a column of locations, a column of outcomes labeled declared and actual. The noise pared down into signal. A route emerged, staging at an airstrip not listed for Ellison assets, pivot to coastal surveillance, escort to asset retrieval, that never declared in U.S. airspace. All of it lived in a zone where public reality bends. Evelyn came by late on a Thursday, clipboard tucked under her arm like a habit. "You're sleeping," she said, almost a question. "Enough," Sarah said. "Keep your notes clean," Evelyn replied, gaze flicking once to the pocket where Sarah kept the tiny notebook. Clean notes are the last thing that saves people when memory gets loud. She turned to go, then paused. Parker was competent. It wasn't an update. It was a permission to balance grief with precision. The next morning, a slim binder with a fresh date waited at the central table. No stamp beyond compartment code. Inside, a training module repurposed as cover, a flight schedule with 2 overlapping times, a line that read public narrative, weather delay. She could almost hear the person who wrote it shrug. She cross-checked satellite imagery timestamps against the schedule. The delay didn't exist. The cover would hold because covers usually do. She filed the discrepancy under a tag she'd started using for lies that travel well. Slowly, the rhythm formed. She opened, read, linked, and closed. She learned to leave breadcrumbs for her future self, why she had circled a code, why she had underlined a date, what she had meant by a margin note that would be incomprehensible next month. She learned to stop when the thread crossed a compartment line. She learned when to ask for permission and when asking would create a record that shouldn't exist. The vault expected care, not heroics. On Sunday, she stood in the stacks upstairs and listened to the hum. She thought about the librarian she'd been 2 weeks ago and realized she hadn't lost her. She just pointed her at a different layer. The same instincts applied: protect the spine, preserve the sequence, repair the torn page before the tear spreads. Downstairs, the work wasn't glamorous. It was maintenance. After lights out one evening, she walked the perimeter of the vault alone, noting which hinges squeaked and which didn't. At the back wall, a drawer she'd never opened stuck halfway. She pressed the release and it slid free, revealing a short folder labeled Consolidated Personnel, closed. She shouldn't. She did. Inside, names she recognized from the logistics ledger sat in a tidy list, each stamped with a status that wasn't public. Parker's line had no paragraph, just a final code she didn't know. She copied the code and closed the folder gently, palms flat to calm the shake. When she stepped out, the corridor felt warmer, or maybe that was her. She didn't need a speech or a promotion to understand what the week had done to her life. She worked both floors with the same care and started to accept that the cost would be paid in private. The point wasn't to feel powerful. The point was to keep the record from rotting. That night at the apartment, the street was empty, the air still. She brewed tea she actually drank. She placed her badge on the table the way she always had, but now it sat next to the envelope with new weight. She wanted answers about Ryan, and she had enough to make a picture that hurt. She also had enough to file it correctly and wait. She was not going to blow a hole in a system she was finally able to steer from the inside, even if the steering was a few degrees at a time. Near midnight, a single knock touched the door, soft and even. She stood, heart steady, not racing. When she looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. On the floor lay a small card, blank on the front, 5 words on the back in clean handwriting. "You're doing it right," the card said, and the message landed softer than any threat because it asked nothing except that she keep going. Sarah set it beside the envelope and understood that approval in this world never came with applause, only with more work. Morning broke flat over the Nevada desert. She drove in without checking her mirror more than twice, not because the sedan was gone, but because she knew it would be there whether she looked or not. Routine was armor. She wore it well. Upstairs, the library breathed like it always had. Manuals came and went. A corporal asked for a checklist he didn't need. She stamped, signed, smiled. Downstairs, the vault waited with a stack marked for crosscheck. The hum in the walls felt familiar, almost companionable. She took the top folder and built the line: dates, movements, declared outcomes, actual outcomes. The picture sharpened. Ryan's trail ended in a field code she had written down days ago, a designation that neither celebrated nor mourned. It recorded. Her chest tightened, then eased. She couldn't change that line. She could keep it from being misfiled, mislabeled, lost. Evelyn showed up in the doorway just before lunch, no clipboard this time. "Walk," she said. They took the long corridor that cut behind supply. No watchers obvious, no cameras turned. "You've adapted," Evelyn said. It wasn't praise. It was inventory. "You kept your surface steady," Sarah answered. "That's the job," Evelyn said. "Up here and down there." They stopped at a window that faced a slice of desert sky. "People imagine the vault as heat," Evelyn added. "But it's cold. Cold keeps things from spoiling. Don't mistake the quiet for safety. It's just temperature control." Sarah nodded. "Understood." "Good," Evelyn said. "Because sometimes you will be the only person who knows the temperature changed." Back in the vault, a pouch labeled consolidation waited on the table. Inside were fragments tied to the code on Ryan's line: airfield logistics, jump seat rosters, a tiny memorandum that acknowledged a body with a date and nothing else. She placed it where it belonged in the sequence, resisting the pull to widen the margin with feeling. Precision was the only tribute she could give that wouldn't be taken back later. She closed the binder and wrote 2 words on a sticky note only she would read later: found, kept. Days slid into a new normal. She learned to measure progress in the small things that never make a speech: a mislabeled crate corrected, a misdated scan fixed before it spread, a cross-index that saved a week for someone she'd never meet. She learned to end a day even when the stack wasn't done. She learned to start a new one even when nothing had moved overnight. She made peace with never getting the whole picture and with being indispensable to the part she held. At Carson Ridge, the sedan stopped showing up every night. Sometimes it came back, sometimes it didn't. The absence felt less like mercy and more like calibration. She replaced her hair across the drawer seam, and it didn't move for a week. Then it did, once, and she found her lamp bulb tightened a quarter turn. Message received, we check that you check. She brewed tea and slept 4 hours in a row. Progress, of a kind. Mr. Gray returned without warning on a Thursday afternoon. He didn't step into the light so much as appear where light already fell. You're within timelines, he said. Your map caught 2 gaps. The easy ones, she said. The easy ones are how we prove the hard ones later, he replied. He didn't sit. He didn't ask about Ryan. He didn't need to. You'll get a cover ad, he said instead. A tasking that keeps upstairs comfortable with why your hours look different. Fine, she said. And a reminder, he added. Tools can be turned into weapons when anger holds them. Keep yours as tools. She met his eyes. I'm not here to burn anything down. Good, he said, and was gone in the efficient way of people who never quite arrive. By month's end, the vault's layout lived in her hands. She could walk the aisles in the dark and place her palm on the right drawer. She could tell by the weight of a binder whether it carried photographs or transcripts. She could tell by the curl of a label how long it had sat undisturbed. She understood she would make mistakes and that the work's success depended on how quickly she corrected them. She stopped talking to the cameras and started talking to herself less. The quiet required shape, not commentary. One evening, Sarah opened a folder she'd been avoiding, closed, admin notes. Inside were policies written like weather reports, conditions, advisories, outlooks. A line caught her, when in doubt, preserve. When pressure rises, preserve. When conscience and protocol disagree, escalate, then preserve. She closed the folder and smiled at how plain it was. People think heroism is loud. Most days it looks like filing something correctly so it can't be erased. She left late. The desert night had cooled. The base lights threw thin cones across concrete. At the edge of the lot, engines coughed and quieted. She drove home without drama. In her apartment, she set the badge on the table next to the card and thought about endings. Stories like this don't end, they narrow into paths you keep choosing. She wanted justice for Ryan that she could say out loud. She wasn't going to get that. She was going to get a record that outlived her, a spine that didn't break just because no one clapped when she repaired it. She washed her cup. She turned off the light. Before bed, she wrote one clean sentence on a strip of paper and tucked it behind the lowest shelf at work where she kept her other quiet things, keep the proof where time can't eat it. It wasn't a slogan. It was a job description. In the morning, the base looked the same, the sun hard and bright, the wind pushing sand along the fence line, the sound of jets punching the air. In the library, a mechanic asked for an old manual she had restored last year. He thanked her without looking up. In the vault, a new stack waited. She adjusted her badge, straightened the top folder, and began again. The hum in the walls held steady. The temperature was right. The story would not be told in headlines. It would be held in the cold, in sequence, intact, because she chose to stand where it could be kept.